Lillian sat in front of the antique vanity mirror, her delicate fingers twisting a golden ring that had been forced onto her hand hours ago. Her heart pounded in her chest as the weight of her reality crashed down upon her. Tonight, she would become the wife of a man she did not love, a man old enough to be her grandfather. Tears welled in her emerald green eyes, blurring the reflection of the beautiful but miserable bride staring back at her. The ivory lace gown clung to her slender figure, a stark contrast to the burden she carried inside. This was not how she had imagined her wedding day. There was no joy, no love, only a suffocating fear that threatened to consume her whole. The door creaked open, and her stepmother, Martha, entered with a forced smile. "You should be grateful, Lillian," she said in her usual sharp tone. "Henry Davenport is a rich man. He'll take care of you. It's more than you deserve." Lillian's hands clenched into fists. Grateful? How could she be grateful when she was being sold like livestock? It had all started months ago when her late father's debts had come crashing down upon them. The creditors had taken everything, their house, their land, even the little jewelry her mother had left behind. The only way to secure a roof over their heads had been to agree to this wretched arrangement. Henry Davenport was one of the wealthiest men in their small Louisiana town. He was a widower in his 60s, his face lined with the passage of time. He had a reputation for being ruthless in business but was oddly generous when it came to charity. When he approached Lillian's family with a proposal, Martha had accepted before Lillian could protest. "Please, stepmother, I can find work," Lillian pleaded, her voice trembling. "I don't need to marry him." Martha's eyes flashed with annoyance. "Don't be foolish, girl. Do you think your pretty face will get you anywhere besides a brothel? A good husband is your only option." Lillian turned away, swallowing back a sob. She had no choice. If she refused, her family would be out on the streets. Her younger stepsister, Claire, would suffer the most. Lillian had always protected her, and she would not fail her now. The sound of wedding bells echoed through the small chapel. It was time. Taking a deep breath, she wiped her tears and rose to her feet. As she walked down the aisle, her gaze locked onto Henry Davenport. His gray eyes studied her, unreadable as she took her place beside him. With a heavy heart, she whispered the vows that bound her to him forever. The moment the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Lillian felt the last bit of hope drain from her soul. The congregation erupted into polite applause, but she barely heard it. Her vision was blurred by tears she fought to suppress. Henry Davenport turned to her, his expression calm and composed. He lifted her trembling hand and pressed a dry, chaste kiss against her knuckles. The simple gesture sent a shiver down her spine, not from affection but from the realization that she now belonged to this man. The reception was held in the grand hall of Henry's sprawling estate. Lillian had been here before as a child when her father worked as an accountant for the Davenport family. Back then she had admired the chandeliers, the polished floors, and the scent of fresh roses filling the room. Now it all felt like a prison. Guests murmured as they stole glances at her, whispering behind their glasses of champagne. Some pitied her, others seemed amused by the absurdity of a young, beautiful woman being wed to a man decades older. She barely touched her plate of food, though her stomach twisted with hunger. Every time she attempted to eat, the weight of Henry's gaze made her lose her appetite. "Eat, my dear," he finally spoke, his voice deep but not unkind. "You've had a long day." Lillian hesitated but picked up her fork, nibbling at the food. She did not want to provoke him, not on their wedding night. Her stepmother, seated nearby, leaned in with a wide grin. "You have a good husband now, Lillian," she cooed, placing a possessive hand on Henry's arm. "He's a man of great influence." Lillian turned away, disgusted by the way Martha fawned over him. She wondered if her stepmother had secretly wished to be in her place. Hours passed before Henry finally rose from his seat, drawing the attention of the remaining guests. "It's time," he announced, and everyone understood what he meant. Lillian's heart pounded in her chest. It was time for the wedding night. As the guests cheered and bid them farewell, she felt like a lamb being led to slaughter. Henry extended his hand to her, and with a final glance at the room full of people who had condemned her to this fate, she placed her shaking fingers in his. The night was only beginning. Lillian's breath quickened as she ascended the grand staircase of Davenport Manor, her hands still clasped in Henry's firm grip. Her mind raced with every possible horror awaiting her behind the heavy oak doors of his bedroom. The moment they entered, he released her hand and strode toward the fireplace, lighting the hearth with practiced ease. The glow of the flames cast long shadows on the walls, making the massive bed in the center of the room seem even more ominous. Lillian stood frozen by the door, her pulse hammering in her ears. She clenched her fists, prepared for whatever came next. Would he be cruel? Would he force her? Her body tensed as she braced for the inevitable. But then something strange happened. Henry turned to her, his expression unreadable, and said, "You look terrified." Lillian swallowed hard. "Shouldn't I be?" she whispered. A ghost of a smile flickered across his lips. "I'm not going to touch you." Her eyes widened. "What?" He sighed and walked over to the large armchair by the window, lowering himself into it. "You think I married you for pleasure? No, my dear. You're young and beautiful, but I'm not some lustful beast. I have no interest in taking a wife who doesn't want me." Lillian's knees nearly gave out beneath her. "Then, why did you marry me?" Henry studied her for a long moment, then exhaled. "Because you needed saving." She stared at him, utterly confused. This was the same man who had bought her like a possession. The same man who had watched her cry during the ceremony without a hint of emotion. And yet, he was telling her he had saved her? "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Your stepmother was going to sell you to someone far worse than me," he said flatly. "You were about to be handed over to a man named Tobias Crane." Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. She had heard whispers of Tobias Crane, a cruel and powerful man with a penchant for young brides who never seemed to last long in his household. Henry continued, his gaze steady. "I made her an offer she couldn't refuse. She got her money, and I got to keep you safe." Lillian's mind reeled. This marriage wasn't about debts or business deals. It had been a rescue mission. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time that night, they weren't from despair. "Then what happens now?" she asked hesitantly. Henry leaned back in his chair. "You live here as my wife in name only. I won't ask anything of you except that you keep up appearances. In return, you'll have wealth, security, and freedom." Lillian's lip trembled. "Freedom? As much as you can have under these circumstances," he said. "One day, if you choose to leave, I won't stop you." She searched his face for any sign of deception, but all she found was quiet sincerity. For the first time that day, she let out a breath of relief. Lillian awoke the next morning to the soft glow of sunlight streaming through the grand bedroom's lace curtains. For a moment, she forgot where she was, the warmth of the silk sheets around her cocooning her in an unfamiliar sense of comfort. But as her mind cleared, the truth came crashing back. She was now Mrs. Henry Davenport, the young wife of an old man. But last night had changed everything. She sat up, glancing toward the other side of the room. Henry was nowhere to be seen, though the armchair he had occupied the night before still bore an impression of his presence. True to his word, he had not touched her. A soft knock sounded at the door before it opened. A middle-aged woman with a kind face entered, carrying a breakfast tray. "Good morning, Mrs. Davenport," she said with a small curtsy. Mrs. Davenport. The name still felt foreign to her. "I'm Margaret, the housekeeper," the woman continued as she set the tray down on a small table near the window. "Mr. Davenport asked me to ensure you're comfortable." Lillian hesitated. "Where's he?" "He's in his study, attending to business," Margaret replied. "He said you may do as you please today." Lillian blinked. Do as she pleased? The idea was so foreign. For years, her life had been dictated by her stepmother's demands, her father's debts, and society's expectations. Now, she was in the home of one of the wealthiest men in town, given a freedom she hadn't anticipated. Tentatively, she got out of bed and approached the breakfast tray. Freshly baked bread, butter, jam, and eggs, far more than she was used to. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but the overwhelming weight of her situation made it hard to eat. Margaret must have noticed her hesitation. "If you need anything, just ring the bell," she said kindly before leaving the room. Left alone, Lillian's eyes wandered across the lavish space. Everything in Henry's estate spoke of wealth: gold-trimmed furniture, crystal chandeliers, fine oil paintings. She should have felt lucky to live in such luxury, but all she felt was trapped. Her mind returned to Henry's words from the night before. "One day, if you choose to leave, I won't stop you." But could she really believe that? Lillian resolved to find out. After dressing herself in one of the expensive gowns provided for her, she ventured into the halls of the mansion. Servants bustled about, offering her polite smiles but keeping their distance. She passed by rooms filled with books, grand pianos, and elegant furniture, yet the house felt eerily empty. Finally, she reached a pair of dark wooden doors slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of her. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Henry sat behind a massive desk, poring over stacks of papers. The room smelled of ink and aged books, a stark contrast to the perfumed halls of the rest of the mansion. He looked up when he noticed her presence. "Lillian," he greeted with a nod. "How are you feeling?" She hesitated before stepping forward. Confused, Henry leaned back in his chair. "I imagine you have questions." She met his gaze. "Yes, I do." Lillian stood in the doorway of Henry's study, her fingers gripping the fabric of her gown. The sunlight filtering through the tall windows cast a glow over the rows of books lining the walls, making the room feel warmer than the rest of the grand, empty mansion. Henry gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." She hesitated but obeyed, lowering herself onto the plush seat. Now that she was here, her questions burned on her tongue, but she wasn't sure where to start. Henry watched her carefully, his face unreadable as always. "You said you saved me," she finally said. "That you married me to protect me from Tobias Crane." "That's correct." "But why?" she pressed. "Why would you go through the trouble? What do you gain from this?" Henry exhaled slowly, setting his pen down on the desk. "Lillian, I am not a good man," he said. "I have done many things in business that some would call ruthless. But I am not a monster." Her brows furrowed. "That's not an answer." He studied her for a long moment before finally responding. "Your father was a good man. He worked for me many years ago and he was honest, rare in this town. When I heard of his passing and what your stepmother was planning, I knew I couldn't stand by and watch Tobias Crane destroy another life." Lillian's breath caught in her throat. "You knew my father?" Henry nodded. "He spoke of you often." His gaze softened just slightly. "He loved you dearly." A lump formed in her throat. It had been years since her father's death, but hearing someone speak of him with such sincerity made her heart ache. She swallowed hard. "So, this is just charity then?" Henry's lips quirked in amusement. "I don't believe in charity. This is an arrangement. You get protection and I get a wife." Lillian tensed. "A wife in name only," she reminded him. He nodded. "Exactly." Silence stretched between them, the crackling of the fireplace the only sound in the room. Lillian studied him, searching for any sign of deception, but found none. Still, one thing nagged at her. "You said you're not a good man," she murmured. "But you're helping me. That seems like a contradiction." Henry chuckled, a deep, rich sound. "Perhaps it is." He leaned forward slightly, his gray eyes holding hers. "But that doesn't mean you should trust me." A shiver ran down her spine. He wasn't threatening her, he was warning her. "But of what?" Lillian stood abruptly. "Thank you for answering my questions," she said. "I won't take more of your time." Henry nodded but said nothing as she left the study, her mind racing with more questions than before. What exactly had she gotten herself into? Lillian wandered the halls of Davenport Manor, her thoughts tangled in Henry's cryptic words. "That doesn't mean you should trust me." Why would he say that? He had saved her from a terrible fate. He had given her safety, wealth, and freedom, more than she had ever hoped for. And yet, something about him remained shrouded in mystery. She needed answers. Determined, she made her way downstairs to the library. The room was just as grand as the rest of the house. Towering bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, a large fireplace crackling softly in the corner, and heavy velvet curtains framing the tall windows. Margaret, the housekeeper, was dusting near the shelves when she noticed Lillian. "Ah, Mrs. Davenport," she greeted with a polite smile. "Can I help you find something?" Lillian hesitated. She didn't want to reveal too much of her curiosity. "I was just looking for something to read," she said. Margaret nodded, returning to her dusting. Lillian moved to the bookshelves, running her fingers over the spines of old books. But what she was really looking for was anything about Henry's past. She pulled out a volume on local history and flipped through its pages. Her eyes skimmed over familiar names, old families, business tycoons, and town scandals. And then she found it. The Davenport fortune, a legacy of power and loss. Her breath caught as she read. Henry's family had built their wealth in trade and banking, but their history was riddled with rumors. His late wife, Eleanor, had died under mysterious circumstances nearly 20 years ago. Some claimed it was illness, others whispered darker possibilities. Lillian's fingers tightened around the book. Was this why Henry had warned her not to trust him? Had he been involved in his wife's death? A sudden noise made her snap the book shut. She turned to see Margaret watching her with a knowing expression. "Curious about your husband, are you?" the older woman said softly. Lillian's heart pounded. "I just didn't know much about his past." Margaret sighed, setting down her duster. "You're not the first to wonder. People have always talked about Mr. Davenport. They say he's a ruthless businessman, that he's dangerous." She hesitated. "But I've worked for him for years. I've never seen him harm anyone." Lillian swallowed. "What about his wife, Eleanor?" Margaret's face darkened. "That is not a subject Mr. Davenport likes to discuss." Lillian's skin prickled. There was something unsaid, something hidden beneath Margaret's words. "Be careful, Mrs. Davenport," the housekeeper said gently. "Curiosity can be a dangerous thing." Lillian clutched the book against her chest, a chill running down her spine. Something told her she had just stepped into a mystery far deeper than she had ever anticipated. That night, sleep evaded Lillian. She lay awake in the grand bed that still felt foreign to her, staring at the ceiling, her mind tangled with questions. Henry's first wife, Eleanor. The name clung to her thoughts like a ghostly whisper. A woman who had died mysteriously. A marriage that had ended in whispers and scandal. What happened to her? Henry had warned her not to trust him, but was that simply a businessman's wariness or something more sinister? Restless, she slipped out of bed, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The house was eerily silent at this hour, the candle sconces casting long shadows against the ornate walls. Something pulled her toward Henry's study. She moved quietly, her bare feet making no sound against the cool marble floors. When she reached the heavy wooden doors, she hesitated only a moment before pressing her ear against them. Silence. Taking a deep breath, she carefully turned the handle. The door creaked open slightly, revealing the study's darkened interior. The fireplace had burned down to embers, casting an eerie glow over the grand desk and bookshelves. Lillian stepped inside, her pulse quickening. If there were any answers about Eleanor, they would be here. She moved to Henry's desk, her fingers hovering over the stacks of documents. Bank ledgers, business records, nothing personal. She opened one of the drawers, finding neatly arranged papers, but one thing caught her attention. A locked box. Her heart pounded as she lifted it, the weight of it solid in her hands. Why was it locked? What was Henry hiding? She was about to search for a key when Lillian. The deep voice sent ice through her veins. She whirled around to find Henry standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. The flickering light from the hallway cast shadows over his sharp features, making him look more intimidating than ever. Her breath caught. She had been caught snooping like a thief in the night. He stepped forward, closing the door behind him. "What are you doing in my study?" Lillian swallowed hard, clutching the locked box against her chest. I couldn't sleep." His gaze flickered to the box in her hands. A long silence stretched between them before he finally exhaled and walked past her, taking a seat at his desk. He gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Sit." Lillian hesitated before obeying, placing the locked box back on the desk between them. Henry steepled his fingers, watching her intently. "You've been asking questions." She lifted her chin. "Should I not?" His lips twitched in the ghost of a smile. "I expected you to. But there are some things in this house you may not want the answers to." Lillian's pulse raced. Like what happened to Eleanor? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Henry's expression darkened. "She was my wife," he said slowly. "And she is gone." Lillian's fingers tightened around the armrests of the chair. "Gone? How?" A long pause. Henry leaned forward slightly, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "Do you really want to know?" Lillian wasn't sure. But it was too late to turn back now. Lillian's throat went dry as Henry's question hung in the air. "Do you really want to know?" She did. But she also feared the answer. "Yes," she whispered. Henry exhaled slowly, his fingers tracing the edge of the locked box on the desk. The fire behind him crackled softly, casting shadows over his face. "Eleanor was troubled," he said at last. His voice was calm, but there was something heavy in the way he spoke, as if each word carried the weight of an old wound. "When we married, I thought I could give her everything she needed. But some things can't be fixed with wealth or comfort." Lillian listened, hanging on to every word. "She was fragile," he continued, "and restless. She wanted more than this life, more than me." He paused, his jaw tightening. "And so, one night she left." Lillian's brows furrowed. "She left?" Henry nodded. "The night she disappeared, there was a fire in the west wing of the house. The flames destroyed nearly everything. When it was over, Eleanor was gone. No body was found, only ashes. Lillian's blood ran cold. You mean, she might still be alive? Henry's lips pressed into a thin line. Some believe so. Others think she perished in the fire. He leaned back in his chair. The whispers in town call it a tragedy. Others call it something worse. Lillian swallowed. What do you call it? Henry studied her for a long moment before finally saying, a mistake. A heavy silence settled between them. Lillian had expected something cruel, something horrifying, but this was something else entirely. A mystery that had haunted him for years. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? She asked softly. Henry sighed, rubbing his temple. Because it doesn't concern you, Lillian. His gaze met hers, sharp and knowing. Unless you plan to keep digging. Her stomach twisted. He wasn't threatening her, at least not directly. But the warning in his voice was clear. She lowered her gaze to the locked box. What's in there? Henry's fingers drummed against the desk. Memories. Some best left undisturbed. Lillian clenched her fists in her lap. There was more to this story. More that he wasn't saying. She had entered this marriage thinking Henry was a cold, unfeeling man. But now she saw something else, a man haunted by the past. And somehow she knew she was about to become entangled in it. The fire's glow flickered across Henry's face, making his unreadable expression seem almost spectral. Lillian's mind raced. If Eleanor had simply run away, why did Henry seem so haunted by her disappearance? Why did he warn Lillian to stop digging? She couldn't. Not when there was something lingering beneath the surface, something Henry wasn't telling her. That night, as she lay awake in the vast bed, she found herself staring at the shadows dancing along the ceiling. The mansion had always felt cold, but now it felt different. It felt haunted. A soft creak echoed in the hallway outside her room. Lillian sat up, heart pounding. The servants had retired hours ago, and Henry's study was on the opposite wing of the house. Who was there? Slipping out of bed, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and quietly pushed open the door. The hallway was dim, only the soft glow of candle sconces lighting the space. Then she saw it. A figure. A woman. Draped in a flowing white gown, she moved soundlessly down the corridor, her dark hair cascading down her back. Lillian's breath hitched as a cold chill seeped into her bones. Eleanor? It couldn't be. She was dead, wasn't she? Barefoot, Lillian followed. The woman turned a corner, disappearing into the west wing, the very part of the house that had burned down years ago. Lillian hesitated at the threshold. The air here was heavier, thick with the scent of old ashes and something else, something metallic. She stepped forward. The remnants of the fire still scarred the walls. Charred beams framed the ruined corridor, and the large windows had been boarded shut, allowing only slivers of moonlight to cut through. The woman was gone, but something else remained. Lillian's eyes widened as she noticed something half-buried beneath the wreckage of the past. A small, ornate locket, its delicate chain glinting in the pale light. Heart-hammering, she bent down and picked it up. The moment her fingers closed around the cool metal, a voice whispered through the silence, soft, breathy, and unmistakably female. Help me. Lillian gasped, stumbling backward, her breath coming in ragged gulps. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body was frozen. Then another sound. Footsteps. She turned sharply to find Henry standing in the doorway, his face carved from stone. His gaze flicked from her to the locket in her hand, and something shifted in his expression. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice lower than she had ever heard it. Lillian's fingers clenched around the locket. Henry, she whispered. I saw her. His jaw tightened. Saw who? She swallowed. Eleanor. For the first time since she had met him, Henry Davenport looked truly afraid. Henry's face was carved from shadow and firelight, his gray eyes dark with something Lillian had never seen in him before, fear. She held up the locket, its delicate chain wrapped around her trembling fingers. I saw her, she whispered. Eleanor. She was here. Henry stepped forward, his usual measured demeanor cracking ever so slightly. Lillian, listen to me. No, she cut in, her voice rising. No more half-truths, no more warnings. I deserve to know what happened to her. Henry sighed, running a hand through his silver-threaded hair. He looked older in that moment, weighed down by something unseen. Finally, he met her gaze. She's dead. Lillian's breath caught. You're sure? Henry nodded once. I wasn't at first. But after the fire, I searched for her. For years. No trace. And the fire, it was too intense. No one could have survived. Lillian looked down at the locket in her palm. Then why did I see her? Henry exhaled sharply and turned away. Because this house doesn't let go of its ghosts. The words sent a chill through her. She had married Henry believing she was stepping into a life of quiet suffering. A loveless marriage to a cold, distant man? But she had been wrong. This house wasn't just gilded and grand, it was a graveyard. And Henry, he wasn't the villain she had imagined him to be. He was a man trying to bury his past only for it to claw its way back to him. She moved closer. Henry, tell me the truth. Did you love her? Henry didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. I did, he admitted. But she didn't love me. Lillian's heart clenched. She wasn't sure why it mattered, but somehow it did. What if she's still here, she whispered. Not alive, but something else? Henry turned back to her, his expression unreadable. Would it change anything? Lillian looked down at the locket again. The weight of it felt heavier now, not just a piece of jewelry, but a tether to something unfinished. She thought of her past, of how she had once been a girl with no choices, no power. Yet now, standing here in the ruins of another woman's tragedy, she realized she had more power than she had ever known. Maybe, she said softly. Maybe it would. For the first time since their marriage, Henry looked at her as an equal. Not as a debt to be repaid, not as a girl he had saved, but as a woman standing beside him in the same haunted house, in the same haunted life. Then he said, let's find out. And together, they stepped into the shadows of the past, not as strangers, but as something more.